There are stories that shake us to our core, tales that play on our deepest fears and refuse to let go. Tonight, we explore a psychological horror that will make you question the very fabric of reality, a story of entrapment, of facing one's darkest demons, and the terrifying truth that some rooms are better left unexplored. This is the story of the room with no exit, trapped in a nightmare. The encounter. It all started with a simple trip, one of those routine journeys that we often take for granted. Our protagonist, Daniel, was an ordinary man living an ordinary life. He was a sales representative for a mid-sized tech company, spending most of his days traveling from one city to another, peddling the latest gadgets to uninterested clients. He had no family to speak of, no close friends, and his life was as mundane as it gets. One day, after a particularly grueling meeting, Daniel checked into a hotel in a small, nondescript town, one of those places you forget the moment you leave. Exhausted and eager to rest, he didn't pay much attention to the hotel's details. The faded wallpaper, the flickering lights, the unsettling silence, they were all just background noise to his weary mind. After checking in, Daniel took the elevator to the 5th floor, his room key in hand. The elevator ride was unnervingly slow, each second stretching into what felt like minutes. When the doors finally creaked open, he stepped out into a dimly lit hallway. A chill ran down his spine as he noticed the silence. No other guests, no staff, just him and the oppressive quiet. His room was at the end of the hall, room 505. He slid the key card into the lock, and with a soft click, the door swung open. The room was like any other hotel room: a bed, a desk, a TV mounted on the wall, and a small window overlooking the town. But there was something off, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Shrugging off the uneasy feeling, Daniel set his suitcase down and prepared for bed. As he lay there, staring at the ceiling, sleep began to overtake him. But just as he was about to drift off, he heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible sound, like a whisper carried on the wind. He sat up, heart pounding, straining to hear it again. But the room was silent, telling himself it was just his imagination. He lay back down and closed his eyes. But the sound came again, this time louder, more distinct, a voice whispering his name. Daniel shot out of bed, eyes wide with fear. He looked around the room, but there was no one there. The voice seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere, all at once, echoing off the walls in a way that made his skin crawl. He reached for his phone, intending to call the front desk, but there was no signal. Frustrated, he decided to leave the room and go downstairs to report the strange occurrence. But when he opened the door, his breath caught in his throat. Instead of the dimly lit hallway, he was staring into the same room he had just left. The bed, the desk, the TV, all of it was there, exactly as it was before. He blinked, trying to make sense of what he was seeing, but the image didn't change. He was staring at his own room through the doorway of his own room. Panic began to set in as Daniel stepped back into the room, slamming the door shut behind him. He took a few deep breaths, telling himself it was just a trick of the mind, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But when he opened the door again, the same room greeted him. He tried the window next, but when he looked outside, he saw only darkness, no town, no streetlights, nothing but an endless void. It was as if the world beyond the window had ceased to exist, leaving him trapped in this nightmarish loop. The descent hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the room. Daniel tried everything to escape. He ran to the door and flung it open, only to be confronted by the same room again and again. He tried breaking the window, but the glass refused to shatter. He screamed for help, but his voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence. Desperation gnawed at him as he paced the room, his mind racing for answers. How had he ended up here? What was happening to him? But no matter how hard he tried to rationalize the situation, the truth was inescapable. He was trapped, with no way out. It was then that the whispers began again, louder this time, more insistent. They seemed to come from within the walls, from the very air around him, taunting him, mocking him. The voices were familiar, yet twisted, distorted echoes of people from his past, people he had wronged, people he had tried to forget. One voice in particular stood out, sending a shiver down his spine. It was the voice of his ex-wife, Sarah. They had divorced years ago, the result of a bitter, loveless marriage. Daniel had walked away without looking back, voice was back, accusing him, reminding him of every hurtful word, every selfish action. "Why did you leave me, Daniel?" the voice whispered, dripping with venom. "You never cared, did you? You were always so cold, so distant." Daniel pressed his hands to his ears, trying to block out the voice, but it only grew louder, more piercing. He fell to his knees, his mind unraveling as the memories he had long suppressed came flooding back. He remembered the arguments, the nights of silence, the way he had shut her out, even when she needed him the most. The voices multiplied, each one representing a different regret, a different failure. His father's voice, disappointed and disapproving. His mother's voice, filled with sorrow and concern. His best friend's voice, the one he had lost touch with after a falling out. Each voice cut into him like a knife, tearing at the seams of his sanity. As the voices grew louder, the room seemed to close in on him, the walls inching closer, suffocating him. He could feel the weight of his mistakes, his regrets, pressing down on him, crushing him from all sides. The air grew thick with the scent of decay, and the light dimmed until the room was bathed in shadow. Daniel was on the verge of collapse, his mind teetering on the edge of madness, when a new voice cut through the chaos. His own. It was cold, detached, almost unrecognizable. It spoke of his deepest fear, the one he had never dared to confront, the fear of being alone, of dying alone, with no one to mourn him. "Is this how it ends, Daniel?" the voice sneered. "Trapped in your own mind, haunted by your own failures. Is this the legacy you leave behind? A life of regret, of missed opportunities, of broken relationships?" The room was spinning now, a vortex of torment and despair, pulling him deeper into the darkness. Daniel knew he was losing himself, that if he didn't find a way out soon, he would be lost forever. But how could he escape when the room was a reflection of his own soul, a prison of his own making? The confrontation, in the depths of his despair, a thought pierced through the fog of his mind, a realization that the room wasn't just a physical space, but a manifestation of his own guilt, his own fears. If he wanted to escape, he would have to confront the very things that had led him here. With trembling hands, Daniel stood up and faced the room. The voices continued to assail him, but he forced himself to listen, to truly hear the accusations, the regrets. Each voice represented a piece of him, a part of his life that he had tried to bury. But now, he had no choice but to face them head on. He started with Sarah's voice, the one that had haunted him the most. He admitted to himself that he had failed her, that he had let the love between them die because he was too afraid to open up, too afraid to be vulnerable. He had pushed her away, and in doing so, had condemned himself to a life of loneliness. Next, he confronted his father's voice, acknowledging the disappointment he had caused by abandoning the dreams his father had for him. He had chosen a different path, one that had led him to where he was now, alone in a room with no exit. But he couldn't change the past, no matter how much he wished he could. One by one, Daniel faced the voices, the regrets, the failures. With each admission, the room seemed to shift, the walls retracting slightly, the air growing a fraction lighter. The whispers grew quieter, less insistent, as if acknowledging his acceptance of his own flaws. Finally, when the last voice had been silenced, Daniel was left standing in the center of the room, breathless and drained. The darkness that had surrounded him began to lift, and for the first time, he could see a faint glimmer of light seeping in from under the door, the escape. With newfound resolve, Daniel approached the door. His hand trembled as he reached for the doorknob, half expecting to see the same room staring back at him. But when he opened the door, he was met with something different. An endless hallway, bathed in a warm, golden light. Relief washed over him as he stepped out of the room, leaving behind the suffocating darkness, the whispers, the torment. The hallway stretched out before him, inviting him to walk forward, to leave the nightmare behind. As he walked, Daniel felt a weight lifting from his shoulders, the burden of his past slowly fading away. He knew that the room would always be a part of him, a reminder of the mistakes he had made, the fears he had confronted. But he also knew that he had faced them, had emerged stronger, more resolute. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, but Daniel didn't mind. He kept walking, each step taking him further away from the nightmare, closer to something new, something that felt like redemption. The story of the room with no exit is a chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest horrors are the ones we create for ourselves. It's a tale of facing our deepest fears, our darkest regrets, and finding a way to escape the prison of our own mind. Thank you for joining us on this harrowing journey. If this story left you with a sense of dread, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to Nicole's Nightmare Narratives for more stories that will keep you awake at night. And remember, sometimes the scariest rooms are the ones within us. Sleep tight if you can.